Hello athletes, Travis here with GTS Rowing. Diving back into some rowing content. It's been a while, maybe almost 2 years since I've been kind of sitting down doing some videos for you guys, but hoping to turn that around in the coming months, get a little bit more creative content out there for you guys to learn from. And actually we're going to be setting up some coaching clinics, some training camps through GTS Rowing clinics to kind of basically condense all the information that I put out through these videos into a nice kind of 2 or 3 day clinic, and then also doing some technique camps on the indoor rower over the winter. So any of you that are interested in kind of getting some hands-on in-person coaching instruction with the principles that I share in these videos, stay tuned to gtsrowing.com for information about that. But for today's video, I want to dive back into things and talk about the back and rowing, specifically give a little bit of history with issues I've had with my back and pain, discomfort, tightness, things that I've seen in other rowers, talk through how I've resolved those issues and at a point now where totally pain-free with that back, and hopefully that'll help some of you guys, guide you in the right direction for what you can do if you're having any kind of tightness, discomfort, or God forbid some pain in the lower back that might even be pulling you out of kind of a regular, whatever your regular training is. So the first and kind of biggest thing I want to talk about with backs, and this is a huge problem in coaching the rowing stroke, and when people are looking at video, people are looking on the water, is this idea that your back should be straight as you're sitting on the erg. And so this causes a lot of problems, and as somebody whose back doesn't look straight on the erg, I get this a ton. Coaches will talk to me about it, and I'll see coaches work with other athletes and they'll kind of fixate on the back, and I'm just like, that person's rowing great, I don't know what you're talking about, you're gonna get them injured. But why is that? One, they're using the back as a cue for whether you're sitting up straight or not. And that's a problem, all right? Because backs come with a lot of different shapes. A lot of them are curved and bent. This might be a developmental issue, there might be a muscular issue, it might be a spinal cord issue, whatever it might be, people's backs are shaped differently. And so if you're looking at that back as a cue for whether that person is sitting up and has a good posture, good supported, strong body posture in the rowing stroke, then that's going to be a problem. Because you're going to see a lot of rowers that are going to have good posture, and if you're looking at the back, you're going to start to give them tips to change what they're doing with that posture that are going to cause issues. So what's the alternative? The alternative, you look at the chest, all right? So when you're looking at an athlete and you're looking at the posture, stop looking at their back, look at their chest. Is their chest up? Is it supported? It's the same idea as if you're looking at somebody that's doing a squat or a deadlift. You're looking at support through the chest. Not so much deadlift because you're going to be a lot more over, but certainly the squat, whether you're doing a high bar squat, whether you're doing a low bar squat, which is going to involve more body angle, the same thing is going to stand. You want to look at the chest. Nobody's coaching the squat looking at your back and asking whether your back is curved or perfectly straight or whatever that might be, all right? They're looking at the chest. And the rowing stroke is essentially a combination of a horizontal squat and deadlift motion in terms of biomechanics, all right? So you're starting out very much in kind of a squat type motion. You transition to more of a deadlift kind of pivot. And so those principles are going to transfer because you're still looking for the same kind of bracing biomechanical angles and positions in the rowing stroke when you're doing that horizontal squat and press and standing up off the foot stretcher as you would if you had 200, 300, 400 plus pounds on your back. So that's the first thing, is from the coaching side, think to yourself, am I sitting up tall? And I can use myself sitting in this chair as an example, is that right now I'm sitting relaxed, my butt is kind of scooted forward, there's a curve in my back, I don't have a tall supported posture. This is what a lot of people, certainly in Western society, who are used to sitting in chairs, are going to develop, and kind of is going to be their comfort. All right, is going to be this kind of curved back. all right? And then my posture is also kind of bent too. So if you're looking at the front, then you can kind of see it in my belly. There's kind of this curve and roundedness in the belly and kind of squishes up, all right? If I were to sit up, all right, in the seat, I would push my hips back, my pelvis is gonna rotate forward, and my chest is gonna be up, all right? My back is still gonna have a slight curve to it because that's how my body's built. And some people are gonna have a lot of curve. One of the best female rowers I ever coached had a huge curve in the upper part of the body. If I ever tried to tell her to straighten that curve, one, it wouldn't happen because that's how her spine was developed, and two, it would cause a lot of problems putting her in a non-supported body position that would have created injuries. All right, and so we're looking at that chest and we're being supported. And one thing I don't want to see when I'm coaching athletes in terms of that posture is rigidity, all right? So sitting up is not this, all right? It's not pushing, all right? If you're thinking like old Austin Powers with the fembots and their little boob guns, all right? We're not doing that with the rowing stroke, right? We're sitting in what is a comfortable, supported position. The same way if you're sitting in a really engaged conversation with somebody, or you're watching a really like kind of edge of your seat type of movie and show, you're up there and you're kind of engaged, but you're not stiff and you're not just sitting there kind of slouched. You're not kind of in this kind of, you know, relaxed, listening to whoever you're talking to type position. You're there, you're engaged, you're talking. This is the type of position that we want when you're sitting on the rowing machine. And that technique is gonna be your first line of defense against any kind of back issues. And so that being said, let's go into my own history because I've had a lot of issues with my back. It's probably the biggest issue I've had. I've never had an injury that took me out of rowing, or I'll rephrase that. I've never had a rowing and training related injury that kept me out of rowing. I have injured my back doing other somewhat rowing tangent things, picking up a dock, picking up a boat, usually picking up things that are way too heavy and with not enough support. Those things have tweaked my back. So I've had back injuries, but they have never come from rowing, all right? But I have had a lot of kind of rowing tension and pain and stiffness through training. I remember times when I was a high performance rower and we would be training in the morning, we would train in the evening, and I remember coming home and after those morning sessions and just laying on that bed, curled up because my back was just so tight. But that was more of kind of like a tight muscle that wasn't kind of an acute injury, all right? And that's something that eventually was able to resolve. It never impacted my rowing on the water, and actually rowing on the water tended to loosen up and made me feel better. It was always what was happening off the water. But that kind of stiffness has really continued past my active career when I've just kind of been, you know, an active human being that sometimes rowed, sometimes ran, sometimes lifted weights, sometimes biked. And that was the case probably until my kind of late 30s, and maybe squeaking into a little bit of my early 40s, where that back would really kind of aggravate in certain situations with my rowing. And for a long time, I assumed that back issue was just kind of a weakness in my training, that I wasn't, usually I talked about, I would say that your core, if you're having back issues, chances are your core is weak. And I would find through my rowing when I was training at a high performance level, whenever my backs did start to kind of have those issues where it was kind of tight and stiff or achy or even painful, if I really hit my abs for a lot in the coming weeks, that would resolve it. All right, so one, I do think that having a strong core as well as good technique in rowing is going to help prevent those back issues. But later on in life, where I'm not doing a lot of training, I don't have a lot of time, I was still feeling a lot of back things. And then there was two kind of epiphanies that I've come to that I wanted to share with you guys that helped me and have kind of been a game changer. And I don't do abs at all anymore. And so I do a lot of lifting these days. I do a little bit of running, and I'll probably dive back into some rowing this winter during the indoor season. I very rarely have time to get on the water. So not a lot of time that I'm doing for ab specific training. I'm not really putting in enough load through the rowing training to kind of create issues with the back. But nonetheless, I've at a point now where my back is a complete non-issue with kind of day-to-day life, living the activities that I do when I do them. Right now, a lot of lifting. Now you would think that similar to rowing, if you're having back issues, they're really gonna manifest when you're lifting. And I've been doing heavy lifting, and so sets of 5, sets of 3, you know, this is not kind of high, you know, 15, 20 rep stuff, all right? So heavy loads, you know, squatting 300, deadlifting 300, you know, overhead pressing 135 to 140, so heavy weights, all right? And you would definitely think that if there was a back issue, it would manifest there. Well, fortunately, what I found is that there were 2 main contributors to the majority of my back pain. And the first one happened kind of in my late 30s, around 38. I made major changes to how I ate, all right? And this was primarily ditching a lot of plant foods and kind of really focusing on animal foods. And for better or for worse, the discipline I've had in my past with training and other activities does not translate well to food. All right, so when I started to make that transition, I would have periods where I was really good, I was eating the things I wanted to do, I was transitioning between kind of a carnivore and a meat-based type of diet, which for the reasons that I did it were primarily mental health, because I kept reading that a carnivore or meat-based diet was getting people off of kind of anxiety, depression medications. It was giving a lot of mental clarity, and I was dealing with a lot of that stuff in my late 30s. And so I made that change, and when I made that change, I happened to find that all of the other chronic health issues that I was dealing with at that time started to disappear as well. And so I've stuck with it, and to this day, I would say I'm not pure carnivore. If I need to train, I need to compete, I would switch to that. But for the most part, I just eat a lot of meat, and kind of my sweet tooth gets the best of me on a regular basis. For that food, what I found early in that early stages is that when I was strict, when I was really disciplined, those back issues would disappear. Those back issues, my joint issues that I had, issues with my ankles, issues with my knees, issues with my back, those things really disappeared when I was very good and very kind of on target with the food that I was eating. A lot of high quality, well-sourced meats, steak, eggs, pork, you know, a little bit of chicken. I didn't eat too much chicken, but when I was eating those things and really avoiding the grains, the pastas, the breads, my back wasn't having any issues. And going back to that lack of discipline, one, I still struggle with the sweet tooth. You know, my fiance is an amazing cook, amazing baker. She's also an amazing cook, but she's an amazing baker. And so there's a lot of temptation that I'm not always great at kind of resisting. And so for better or for worse, I had a lot of kind of A-B experimental data where I would eat clean, falter, eat something else, feel the kind of effects of that, go back to eating clean, have those effects reverse, and kind of go back and forth over the course of many years that were able to let me identify what are the foods that were causing me a lot of problems. And the primary culprits of that were pastas and breads and any type of kind of, you know, really processed grain type of things. And so might be cereals, though I haven't eaten cereal for probably 15, 20 years. Things like that, oats. I have had probably, you know, maybe 10 years ago, you know, would eat oatmeal. But when I would eat those things, especially the pasta and the breads, and really high processed sugars. So candy, coming up on Halloween, the type of Halloween candy, that stuff would really bring the pain back. Not only in the back, it would start to make my back really tight, really uncomfortable. There'd be days, if I really binge, if I were to have like, you know, a chicken casserole, which was like my signature dish, you know, back in kind of my 20s and 30s. If I made that and ate it, it would really give me an unhappy back. And so I would sense there'd be some days where I couldn't even touch my knees. My back, you know, was so stiff. And if I did bend down, it was really painful to get back vertical. And so it was very interesting to go through that process and finding, okay, there are a lot of these foods that are causing this issue with my back. And in that process, it took me a while to figure out it was there, because I would also spend a lot of times, and this was really a lot of time in the bulk of when this channel started, I would spend a lot of time kind of on the couch with my laptop and kind of in that kind of hunched over position, kind of typing. And I would always assume that it was because I was spending a lot of time kind of in that hunched over position, on the couch, in the bed, working on the computer, whether it was typing emails, creating documents, editing videos. I assumed that was it. But over time, I found that it was the food that was causing it. Whenever I was eating specific foods, those foods would bring back the back pain. And not just back, as I mentioned, I would have a lot of joint pain in my knees, a lot of joint pain in my ankles. And so when I was eating clean, it would eliminate those things. And so that was step number one. Look to your food. If you're having a lot of chronic back issues, look to the food, do some research, do some experimenting. I'm a big believer in the fact that, humans evolved. The big evolutionary steps of humans were when we're eating a lot of animal-based food. Animal-based food is the only place that humans are going to eat, no matter where they are. There are a lot of humans that exist in Arctic climates. They're not sitting there eating a lot of fruits and vegetables. If they ever see a fruit and vegetable in their entire life, they're eating a lot of animal foods. Clearly, we can survive and thrive on those foods. And I think that that was a key of our evolution as humans. And so going back to that as kind of like a reset, I think is an effective method for any person. And then some of us are better adapted to those other foods, so those other plant-based foods, and we can eat those without problems. Other people, more like myself, there are very few foods that you can eat, outside of that kind of animal focus, that you can eat without any issues. And I think everybody is different, because I think it really depends on where's your genetic heritage. Are you, from a very northern kind of genetic heritage? Me, I'm from more kind of Denmark, the Netherlands, kind of Northern European. Certainly if you have someone coming from Pacific Islander where they're eating a ton of kind of fruit in addition to seafood, compared to an Eskimo who's probably never seen a fruit or vegetable in their entire life. If depending on our genetic heritage and how many thousands of years that heritage has had to adapt to those local foods, I think that's going to determine kind of what non-animal foods you're okay eating. But at the core, all humans should be able to thrive on that fatty animal meat. And so experiment with that. There's a lot of information on the internet. Look for it. If you're having those chronic back issues, if you're having chronic joint issues, knees, ankles, whatever it might be, look to your food first. Now, what's the second step? The second step was strength and lifting. In particular for me, it was the deadlift. The deadlift, I can't understate how much the deadlift has kind of put kind of the kibosh on any issues that I've had with my back. And the way I found this is, for a long time, I avoided heavy lifts, squats, deadlifts, whatever, because my back was tight. And I was like, well, I need to get my back strong first before I do this heavy lifting or even kind of moderate lifting, because I feel like that moderate lifting is going to be a threat to the health of my back. And by pure chance, I'm there coaching some athletes over the winter. They're doing steady state. Any coach can attest, there's only so many hundreds of hours of steady state you can watch without going completely insane. And so they're doing their steady state. I'm kind of watching, checking in technique every once in a while. And I'm like, what, I'm going to stretch out and doing some light deadlifts. I think there was like maybe 25, 30 kilos on the bar. All right, so very light. And lo and behold, the next day, my back felt a lot looser. Did that a couple days later, my back still, continued to feel loose, which inspired me kind of in a deep dive into learning all I could about kind of strength training and the technique, making sure my technique was on point, going through a linear progression, a novice linear progression in my case, to kind of build up the strength and the actual weight that I was lifting. But through that process, it came to me and I realized all that time that I was thinking, okay, I shouldn't lift because my back is weak and I need to get a strong back before I lift. The real issue of where the majority of my back pain was coming from was because my back was weak. And if your back is weak, your back is going to hurt, because we use our back nonstop in our daily activities, certainly if we're rowing. And so the answer was just to be very patient and very deliberate with the strength training that I was doing over the course of multiple years to kind of build up to where I was lifting heavy, ensuring that technique, like rowing, when you're starting rowing, technique was your prime focus, all right? So you're not lifting crazy weights, You're lifting moderate to heavy weights, all right, with emphasis on the moderate to start, so that there is kind of a resistance that forces some good technical precision. But going back, that eventually got to the point where it was just, the back pain was gone, and my back is strong. You know, I think when I started lifting, I was struggling to squat, what was it, maybe like 170 pounds, something like that. You know, probably even less than that. Actually, it was less than that. I was probably closer to 150 pounds. And I'm struggling to remember because I lift in kilos. And the deadlift was probably, you know, not as much more. Probably deadlift was, you know, maybe 20, 30 pounds more than the squat at that time. You know, overhead press, probably starting in the, you know, 85 pounds, maybe 90 pound range, maybe even lighter than that. But over time, doing those lifts and progressing to the point where, you know, now squat over 300, you know, deadlift the same, you know, overhead press, you know, up in the kind of, you know, mid 140s, you know, maybe 150. I usually don't do max lifts. I only do sets of 3 or 5, maybe a set of 2. But so a lot of progression there, very patiently over time, primarily focused on technique. And the system that I found worked for me was starting strength. You know, I found Mark Rippetoe, who is the founder of that system, to be incredibly well informed and articulate about why he did things and be able to explain it and be able to answer challenges to that system. And more importantly for Mark, and this kind of reflects on my own training, is that that system was not developed, you know, in an elite environment. You know, is that it was developed for the average person and kind of tuned over the course of decades working with the average person, all right? Because it's very easy, and rowing falls into this trap all the time too, of trying to take training principles from an elite environment and translating them to a normal human population. So you're taking training principles that you're applying to a very elite human being, an elite physiology, and sometimes an abnormal physiology, and being like, well, if I just water this down the right amount, it'll work for normal people, which is stupid, all right? That's like saying, yo, I'm gonna, you know, do my best. I'm just gonna take a bike from somebody in the Tour de France and I'm gonna ride and I'm gonna suddenly be, you know, I'm gonna do fine. No, that's very tuned and custom to those individuals, that group, all right? And it was the same with lifting, is that, you know, I was a big fan of what Mark had done with starting strength, you know, and I followed it with a lot of success. And there's flaws too as well. It's mainly the human element of flaws and kind of who you're working with, and making sure you're advocating for yourself, making sure you're not completely married to a rigid structure and plan that you can kind of adapt as you go. But ultimately at the core, very effective program that also prioritizes technique over how much you're putting on the bar. And so that's a summary of my experience. You know, I was walking around today and I was like, you know what? You know, the quality of life for me now is so much better that I am not ever having any kind of tight back pain issues, you know, bending over, picking things up. Well, I have issues bending over because I don't like to stretch a lot, you know, and I have less flexibility. But, you know, that strength has really changed the quality of life. And when I do get on the erg, when I am, you know, hopping on the erg, you know, whether it was during the winter, last winter, and when I plan to hop on it again this winter, that back has not been an issue. And so as something that I know comes up with rowers a lot, I wanted to have that discussion. I wanted to share my experience with you guys in the event that it could help and kind of at least set you on the right path to addressing your issues. And so in summary, number one, your technique is key. If you're rolling with bad technique, you're gonna hurt yourself, whether it's your back, whether it's any other part of your body. Primarily your back is gonna suffer, your ribs, you know, maybe a little bit of your knees, maybe a little bit of your shoulders, but bad technique in rowing is gonna cause issues just like any other sport. So you need to address that technique first. And when you're addressing that technique, you wanna think about being strong, but you wanna use your chest and your sternum as your reference point to, are you supported, you know, in a good position that's not stiff, that's not lazy, that's strong and supported. If you're doing that, then round with all the other technique stuff, then you'll be in a good position to kind of have a strong back that's not getting injured by hundreds, maybe thousands of reps of the rowing stroke every day. Next, food, all right? If you're having a lot of issues, if you're having a lot of joint pain beyond just the back, look to your food, look to that diet. You know, going to an animal-based diet for at least a couple weeks, for a month, you'll quickly notice some changes. And then if you're able to eliminate that and start to add things back in one at a time, you will get a very distinct data point over how that particular food helps you. And I distinctly remember the first time when I had started eating this way and I was weekend, I was like, oh, I have this corn on the cob that I bought, and I used to love corn on the cob. I have these potatoes that I bought. I don't want them to go to waste. All right, let's make some corn today. Oh, all of a sudden I'm just like super bloated, you know, within 5 minutes eating the corn. All right, so corn does a lot to create a lot of bloating for me. You know, a couple days later, I want to eat those potatoes. I ate those potatoes. Man, I am tired as hell and just really having trouble focusing within 10-15 minutes. Clearly that food was having that specific effect on me because it happened immediately after eating it, despite not having those issues for the week or two that preceded it. So look to that diet, use it as a reset. There's a lot of information on YouTube. I'm not going to go into the specifics. Dive into that rabbit hole on your own. And even on Rowing Resource, the podcast that I do, I talked with Shawn Baker, who's a world record setting indoor rower, who's a big proponent kind of in that sphere of nutrition. A lot of data there. Look to that Rowing Resource podcast. You can see it talked about in the context of rowing, but there's thousands and thousands and thousands of hours out there of information. And the third one, strength. All right, don't assume that you can't lift because you have back issues or other issues in the body. That just means you need to start more patiently. You really need to make sure you have, you know, rock solid technique with your execution of all these lifts. Use compound lifts. I would never use a machine for lifting. I'm a big proponent, especially as an athlete in a sport that requires balance and coordination. You know, anytime you're lifting weights, it is not about the number you're putting on the bar. It is about the quality execution in combination with the weight that you're moving. And so we use compound lifts, we use barbells, if needed we use dumbbells, you know, because all of those things require balance and coordination, and balance and coordination are just as important in rowing and having a good performance in rowing as the number that you're putting up. So look to that technique, use compound motions, the squat, the deadlift, the overhead press, the bench press. Even though you're a rower, you got to do the bench press, because if all you do is make your back strong, your chest isn't strong, you're going to start cracking some ribs and causing some problems here, right? So you have to be balanced. That doesn't mean you need to be killing the bench and working on your pecs every time you go to the gym. It just means the bench is also an important motion for a rower, even though you're not pushing in the rowing stroke. So that's it. Look up starting strength. Look up guys like Dr. Shawn Baker, Dr. Paul Saladino, Dr. Ken Berry, Michaela Peterson, a lot of people. Paul Mason, Dr. Paul Mason is a great person to listen to. A lot of people out there in that space on the food side. But yeah, starting strength, Mark Ripito, and then just find a good rowing coach, all right? Find a good rowing coach. Be discriminatory about who you're finding. There are a lot of mediocre and bad rowing coaches out there that kind of, you know, pass themselves off as higher level. Find a good rowing coach. Try to work with them in person as much as you can. If you can't do in person, remote is sufficient. I offer remote coaching through Zoom. You can look at gtsrowing.com if you're interested in that. But I'm a firm believer that if you can get a high quality coach in person, it's going to do better than I can do kind of, you know, just describing things through a Zoom call. So that's it. Long talk. Hopefully it helped. You know, welcome back everybody to the channel. Check out gtsrowing.com if you're looking for some remote coaching. If you want to try Zoom coaching sessions, I'm happy to help, even if I think being there in person would be better. For that in person, keep it on that website. I'll talk about it more on the site of doing some camps up here in New Hampshire, southern New Hampshire. If anybody's interested in kind of coming to learn and really getting immersed in some rowing technique for a weekend, I'll get some more information on that over time. But that's it. So thanks for watching, guys. Subscribe if you want more of this. Throw a comment below if you have questions. I try to interact as much as I can, you know, in that comment section. But that's it. We'll catch you on the next video. Bye.